Classical Music Happy Hour is supported by Viking, committed to exploring the world in comfort, offering destination-focused small ship experiences on all 7 continents with a shore excursion included in every port and programs designed for cultural enrichment. And every Viking voyage is all-inclusive, with no children and no casinos. Learn more at Viking.com.
Gustavo, did you see the score? Yes. Let's rehearse it. And I said, oh my God, okay, here we go.
From WQXR and Carnegie Hall, this is Classical Music Happy Hour, hosted by me, pianist Manny Ax. Each episode will speak with a special guest about their lives, listen to some of their favorite musical gems, play music-inspired games, and answer questions from you, our listeners. Conductor Gustavo Dudamel has called my guest today one of the most talented composers in the world. Growing up in Mexico City within a family of musicians, she insists that rather than choosing music, music chose her. She's known for her mixing of musical idioms, and her latest album, called Revolución Diamantina, won 3 Grammy Awards, including Best Contemporary Classical Composition. Gabriela Ortiz, welcome to the show, and thank you so much for coming.
Thank you, Emanuel, for this incredible invitation.
You grew up in a musical family. Did they all play instruments? Were they composers themselves? What did they do, really?
Well, my mother played the piano. I mean, she studied piano. She was a good reader. She never became a professional pianist, and she was a psychologist. But yeah, she played the piano. She was the one that knew how to read music. But then my father played the guitar. My father, his family comes from Guadalajara, from Jalisco, where, the mariachis and the son jalisciense comes from.
Yes.
So my father loved to play the guitar, and he sang very, very well.
Uh-huh.
So basically, I grew up listening to folk music and listening to classical music. That was very normal in my house. And they found this group called Los Folcloristas. That was a famous group in the 60s, playing all the folk music, not only from Mexico, but from Latin America. And I remember listening to the Los Folcloristas rehearsing in my living room, in my house.
Fabulous.
And then my father, let's play Beethoven. So it was very common in my house to hear Beethoven and then to hear folk music and then hear mariachis. And that was very common.
So that's an amazing combination, because very often the background of a composer or a pianist or a violinist is one type of music. They hear Beethoven all their life and that's what they play. But to have this combination as a child must have been amazing.
Yes, my favorite uncle, he's a scientist, he's a mathematician, but he's the one that introduced me to the Beatles, and he's the one also to introduce me to the rock of the 70s and in the 60s. And then my brother loved it. So it was very common that don't hear folk music. Let's hear Led Zeppelin. And I prefer Led Zeppelin. So I have my brother always going into the opposite side of my parents.
So all of that must be influencing what you do now.
Absolutely.
But you wanted to be a flamenco dancer.
Yes.
As a child, right?
Yes, yes. One of my favorite folk music in Mexico is son jarocho. And the son jarocho, it's played in Veracruz. And it's very famous because they do the zapateado, the stepping. And that comes from the flamenco.
Okay.
So that's why I also like flamenco very much. And probably this is also because of my grandfather. He came from País Vasco. So I have this Spanish side also as well in my blood, probably, that it's just, I love it. I mean, it's fire. It means so many things. So yes, I was just dancing flamenco. And then when I was 14 years old, I remember that I saw this movie that it's called Bodas de Sangre, based on Lorca's text by Carlos Saura, this famous Spanish filmmaker.
Yes, I've seen the Carmen movie.
Exactly, Carmen. And then that was Antonio Gades, was one of these famous flamenco dancer. And I remember saying to my father, I don't want to finish high school. I want to move to Spain, and I want to study with Antonio Gades, and I want to dance in his company. And then my father said, do your homework, and then we can talk later about this idea.
Well, it's my fantasy to dance like him and look like George Clooney. And for some reason, neither of those things happened. I'm sorry to say. And then you have a connection to Mahler and a specific movement from his Fifth Symphony, the Adagietto. Which it's a sublime movement. But what do you feel is special about that?
The Adagietto is one of the most tender moments in music history. It's so difficult to describe with words because it's so intense, it's so beautiful. But also, I think that I have an attached history behind the Adagietto. My grandfather studied medicine at Georgetown University. He came from Spain. He arrived to Jalisco in Guadalajara. And then his family sent him, this is at the beginning of 20th century, to Georgetown University to study medicine. And at that time, he went to New York and heard Mahler. He saw Mahler conducting.
Wow.
So my father grew up listening to Mahler. I mean, that came from my grandfather. Yeah. And it's an interesting story because when he came back, he was a doctor and he was working in a hospital in Guadalajara. This is when, the Mexican Revolution just started. And Pancho Villa came to the hospital and he asked, who is this guy, with the blonde hair that is taking care of my soldiers? Oh, my grandfather. He said, well, you're coming with me. And so my grandfather spent 10 years, by the way, with Pancho Villa in the Mexican Revolution.
Amazing.
And it's an amazing story,
wow.
My grandfather. Wow. But he loved Mahler, really loved Mahler. Yeah. And I remember the first time I saw my father really crying is when he was listening the Adagietto.
Do you find yourself being quite liberal with people who play your music? I mean, allowing them to do different things?
I really believe that performers are also creators. They are incredible artists, and they have this creative perspective that I really respect. So when a performer puts his own personality into his playing, I really respect that. Like, for example, the Attaca String Quartet played my piece, and they did it so wonderful. And it's their own interpretation, their own world, their own way of playing, and that was really fantastic.
Yeah. So sometimes you imagined a different sound, but you might be happy with what you get.
Exactly. I mean, with Dudamel, for example, sometimes he really plays very fast my music. And sometimes it's very exciting. Yeah. It's like, how, Gustavo, you're just really conducting this so fast. Wow.
I actually wanted to ask because in the Revolución, the pink glitter, unbelievably, it sounds incredibly difficult. And the chorus is just amazing. How do you get these people to do that?
I know I write very difficult music, but not because, difficult music means that it has to be really good. I mean, that's...
Yeah. No, it's incredibly exciting. It's just as someone who plays, I'm always thinking, oh my God, I could never learn that. It's just, well, part of it is because I'm really old.
No, I don't think so. You don't look like that. You look fantastic.
Can you tell me a little bit about a piece like Clara?
Well, Clara was commissioned by the New York Philharmonic and Gustavo Dudamel. And the idea is that they commissioned this piece to be paired with Schumann's symphonies. So Gustavo told me, why don't you explore the relation between Clara and Robert? Because of that, I started reading a lot about Clara, about Robert, about this really strong but very complicated and painful relationship
So you get
them.
a lot of the inspiration comes from the life of the composer.
Absolutely, the life of both.
I see.
But then there is a central section of this piece that, because I thought a lot about, should I quote Clara's music in this piece or shall I quote Robert Schumann? And then I decided no, but what if instead of me traveling to their world, why I don't bring them into my world? That was my question. And then trying to have this conversation in a circle kind of thing where the past meets the future or the future meets the past. So in the middle section is my idea of bringing what happens if Robert Schumann and Clara come to Mexico? or drink tequila, or what would have happened? So this is my idea. So the central part is very rhythmic and it has a very different feeling.
So, Gabriela, I'm hoping that you can help me answer some questions about classical music from our WQXR listeners. We've invited them to submit their questions, and we're going to do our best to answer them. And if I don't know the answer, I'll just make something up.
Okay.
Now, we have a question about musical instruments.
Hi, Manny. This is Nancy from Lewis, Delaware. Here's my question. It doesn't seem as though the basic instruments of the orchestra have changed much in hundreds of years. Why is that? The cello is, of course, perfect, but are there no improvements or inventions that can be made to other instruments other than adding computer elements? Could there be a differently shaped string instrument or a longer flute? I see invention in composition and forms of musical performance, but not much invention other than electronics in the instruments themselves. Why is that? Inquiring minds want to know.
Wow.
Okay, well, I'm going to let Gabriela start to answer that because she knows.
That's a very interesting question. I know that there are a lot of explorations on strings, but in terms of how, musicians play the strings, not in terms of the acoustic of the instruments. But what I know, for example, with the flute, because I'm married with a flutist, is that there are a lot of improvements about the flutes. For example, glissandos, that normally the flutes cannot do a glissando, or, the range of the flutes. Now we have a contrabass flute, but they are not in the orchestra for other reasons, because, for example, the contrabass flute, the sound is very soft. They needed amplification. So probably one of the reasons that composers have not used these instruments in the context of an orchestra is because of that, probably because of the balance. Mm-hmm. In percussion, for example, the marimba, the beginning of the 20th century, the marimba got to a low A, and now we have a 5-octave marimba, which means that we have a really bass marimba thing, and that's really common. So basically in percussion, you can see always new instruments, acoustically speaking, that they are not electronics.
Yeah, I think as far as going higher than a violin, I don't know that the human ear would pick up so much. So, as you say, if the cello is perfect, I would say the violin is probably pretty close to perfect for what it does. And my main instrument is the piano. In fact, my only instrument is the piano. I've never played anything else. But there have been incredible changes up to the beginning of the 20th century. Since then, we've been sort of locked down, but there are always extensions in terms of just sheer volume. The pianos from 1900 did not have the power of the piano today. So that's a big change, I suppose. And there are pianos with extra octaves that are made by Bösendorfer, which is actually very scary to a pianist because, well, they do put them in black rather than white. But I remember playing a Brahms concerto on one of those pianos, and this particular concerto starts on the next to last note of the regular piano. And I was looking down, all of a sudden I see all these extra keys and I think, what the heck is that? So you need to get used to it. Also, I did play what you'd call an ergonomic piano. There's a famous architect, Raphael Vignoli, who died last year, who designed the hall in Philadelphia, the Verizon Hall. And he also built a piano that was sort of based on the ergonomic computer, you know, where the keyboard is kind of curved. This keyboard is also curved. And I actually practiced and played it in Philadelphia. In his hall, he designed this piano. He was a very good amateur pianist. And it looks amazing. So that is, I don't know if it's an improvement, but it's certainly a change. I don't know if we'll see a lot of that. Anyway, thanks for the question. This is Classical Music Happy Hour. I'm Manny Ax. We'll return in just a moment.
Classical Music Happy Hour is supported by Viking, committed to exploring the world in comfort. For over 25 years, Viking has been connecting the thinking person with the world. First on the great rivers, then on all 5 oceans, now on all 7 continents. Whether you choose to journey through the heart of Europe on an elegant Viking longship, explore the ancient cities of the Mediterranean on a small ocean ship, or venture to the white shores of Antarctica on a purpose-built expedition ship, you will always experience thoughtful service, destination-focused dining, and cultural enrichment on board and on shore. And every Viking voyage is all-inclusive, with no children and no casinos. Learn more at Viking.com.
In every episode of Songwriter, an extraordinary artist tells a story, and a musician plays a brand new song written in response. This season, you might hear a story from Academy Award-nominated actress Isabella Rossellini, and then the premiere of a brand new song by Sharon Van Etten, not to mention conversations about inspiration along the way. You can search for my name, Ben Arthur, wherever you get your podcasts, or just go to songwriterpodcast.com.
I'm Manny Ax, and this is Classical Music Happy Hour. Let's return to our conversation with Gabriela Ortiz. What is your favorite drink after a long day?
I used to drink tequila, but now I think that mezcal is one of my favorite Mexican drinks.
Wow. Amazing.
But also a glass of wine. I mean, my father loves wine. So, yes, also a good wine, a good, dry, white wine.
What's the best book you've ever read about music?
About music? Oh, my gosh. That's very difficult. There is a Cuban writer, Alejo Carpentier. He's not really famous probably in the English literature. But there are 3 books, and it's called El músico que llevo dentro, the music that is inside me. And it's really an incredible writer, and I think that was one of the best books that I read about music.
Great. What is a concert that you would wish to hear again?
The first time that I heard the Rite of the Spring live was when I was studying music in London. And I heard Boulez conducting by memory. And I was so surprised because I've never heard Stravinsky, and especially the Rite of the Spring in a live situation. Okay. And yes, I couldn't even breathe after that.
You talk about the idea of pulse being maybe different from rhythm, or is that sort of one word meaning the other to you?
I mean, pulse is about rhythm. But, what happened, especially in the second half of the 20th century, is that many European composers feel the rhythm in a more abstract way. They focus more in the series of durations and things like that instead of feeling the music with a pulse. And the way probably Latin culture feels the rhythm is always within a pulse. For me, it's very difficult to feel a piece of music that doesn't have a and specific pulse. Even if you have metric changes or it's very regular, you have a pulse. You have the sense of pulse. And for me, that is very important.
What I find in your music is also a great variety of rhythm and great variety of, if you choose to call it, pulse. I think what I was brought up with was very steady, metric beats, and in a way more importance being paid to harmony and melody. And I think maybe that's one of the things that's changed in music, in composition since 1900.
That's true. I mean, I think that there are so many parameters in music that you can focus on: timbre, texture, noise. But certainly, my feeling towards harmony and melody is still very important in my music.
Well, sure, you can't get rid of one.
No, I think that's part of what I do.
One of the pieces that completely blew me away was this violin concerto, which is on the Revolution record.
Diamantina, yes.
With Maria Dueñas, who sounds incredible. Do you know the violin well? It sounds terrifyingly difficult, but it all seems to work.
No, I don't play the violin, but probably my experience about writing string quartets gave me some knowledge about the violin. And then I think Maria was a very strong inspiration for me. This is very important for a composer. When you know that you're going to write for a specific performer, it's just fantastic.
So you heard her play and you heard recordings. And did you talk to her at all as you were working on the piece?
Only once, believe
Just
me.
one time?
Yeah, I think twice, but very briefly. And then I sent her, the solo part. And then I said, wow, probably I will receive thousands of questions. And then silence. So I was very curious and I was very scary, actually. I have to confess that, maybe she doesn't like it or I don't know. And then I arrived to the hotel before the first performance with the LA Philharmonic. And I remember that we have our first rehearsal in the hotel in her room. And then she played the entire concert to me. Incredible. And she just mentioned, these octaves at that speed are very complicated. So maybe I just want to play the top note of these octaves. Probably that's all we change.
I remember reading some letters of Brahms where he was writing to his friend Joseph Joachim back and forth about, is this practical? Is this practical? Is this practical? But I guess with someone like her, it doesn't matter. Everything is practical. And in a way, may I ask the same kind of question about working with someone like Dudamel? You give him a piece of music. Does he make changes? Does he make suggestions? Do you talk about things like balances, tempos, what's possible, what's not possible?
I think with Dudamel, it's a very different situation. When you work with a performer or when you work with chamber musicians, you have more time for rehearsals. That's the truth. But with an orchestra, time is very limited.
Sure.
So you have to arrive with a very professional score. You don't want to waste time during the rehearsal. Okay, could we try this or could we try this in the other way? We could do that in specific places, but you have to be very smart because time is gold.
Yes, but before you ever get to the rehearsal stage, when you look through the piece with him, before the orchestra even begins to play, does he have suggestions about things?
Normally, Gustavo is so busy that we never have time to discuss a piece to be sincere. I mean, usually you just arrive to the rehearsal and that's it. But at this point, Gustavo knows my music so well. He understands everything so well that there's no need really to do that. But I remember, my first time with the New York Philharmonic, I was just really, really scary. I arrived to the first rehearsal and my heart was beating at, I don't know, at a really high speed. And I was like, Gustavo, did you see the score? Yes. Let's rehearse it. And I said, oh my God, okay, here we go.
What about La Mer? So La Mer, I know you love the piece.
I love the piece.
What about it?
Something that I really like is that Debussy really capture the poetry and the mystery of the ocean. I had this obsession with water, and obviously one of my obsessions is the sea, is the ocean. I spent my childhood going to Colima, Manzanillo, which is one of the states where my grandmother comes from, and spent the whole summer in front of the beach, and I always find it fascinating. His sense of harmony is unbelievable. His sense of color, it's so beautiful. The way he orchestrates that is so unique. It simply is enigmatic and beautifully crafted.
Do you find some kind of connection between Ravel, Debussy, and water?
Okay.
There seems to be a lot of music by both of them that deals with water.
You know, I had the chance to visit Saint-Jean-de-Luz, which is the little town where Ravel was born, and it's near the ocean. I think that Ravel grew up having the ocean in his head.
A listener wants to know about the social dynamics of orchestras.
Do members of large orchestras get cliquey? Like, is backstage of the symphony kind of like a high school cafeteria where the woodwind people don't sit at the same table as the percussion people? Or is everyone maybe a lot friendlier than I'm giving them hypothetical credit for?
Gabriela, would you like to try to answer that? Or
Okay. Well, it depends on the orchestra, I guess. Can you answer that? I mean, from your own perspective?
My experience is that, yes, sometimes they gather by instrument, but I actually know of several cases where, because of some long-standing feuds for reasons which I'm not aware of at all, there are members of a section that don't speak to each other for years. It's like a family. You know, there are families where all the brothers and sisters get together every holiday, and there are others where you don't meet until you have to.
Exactly.
Until there's a funeral or something.
But in my experience, probably the percussionists are the exception. Normally, that section, they're very friendly to each other. And
I agree with you. And also trombones. Trombones and tuba are always together, and they like to have a beer after a concert. That's been my feeling.
Yes.
Thank you for the question. So let me ask about a title, Revolución Diamantina, the album that won the Grammy. What does the title mean?
Well, you know, Revolución Diamantina is a ballet, and the ballet is inspired about this protest that happened in Mexico City against violence to women. Mm-hmm. And this protest became very controversial because these women that went to the streets protesting, they did a lot of graffitis in very important monuments, and then they throw glitter through the whole city. So since then, you know, that protest took the name of Revolución Diamantina.
Because of the sparkle.
Because of the sparkle.
Yeah.
So the title comes from that protest. And it's a kind of, it's my protest. It's my way of saying, we need to stop this. Mm-hmm. You know, unfortunately in Mexico, every single day there are 11 feminicides. 11 women die every day in my country. So that has to stop.
Yeah. You're often moved to write music in response to ideas like this.
Absolutely, yes, because I want to express many things. For example, climate change. I think that we are facing a very difficult moment right now as human beings. And I want to talk about that. And the best way that I could do it is through my music. So definitely those themes are just fuel for my creativity and also the necessity for me to speak out.
Do you find that music is a way to escape what's around us or a way to engage us in what's around us?
I think it has those meanings. I mean, you can escape by listening to wonderful music. For example, if I feel sad and then I play Celia Cruz, which is, the salsa music, I start dancing and I forget my sadness.
Okay.
It's contagious.
Yeah.
So you can escape, or you can really feel consolation or comfortability by listening to music that gives you that. Mozart, for example, for me, is a way to get comfort. But also you can get the other thing. I listen to music, and when you read the program notes, and then you understand why this composer wrote this music, then you can get consciousness about many things. Or think about Messiaen when he wrote the Quatuor pour la fin du temps.
Yeah.
This quartet was written in a concentration camp. When you feel that, you feel the strong, believing in humanity and in art. And despite all these really terrible conditions, he was producing one of the most beautiful pieces that I ever heard.
I find it amazing to read, for example, about what Beethoven was going through when he was in despair and thinking about ending his life and writing music that's actually his funniest music. So it's sometimes the disconnect between those two is endlessly fascinating to me.
Me too. I mean, just think about Bartók writing the concerto for orchestra or the viola concerto at the end of his life when he was having cancer.
Yeah.
I mean, it's unbelievable. He wrote, I think, that symphony in 3 months.
Yeah. Here we have a question from a listener in South Carolina. This I know you're going to love.
My name's Jock, and I'm here in Charleston, South Carolina. My question has to do with folk music, and I would like to know how popular has it been for folk music to be recorded, written down by composers, and then turned into great symphonies or clarinet concertos or whatever it might have been. So that's my question. Thank you.
Wow. There are so many composers that got inspiration in folk and popular music. I can tell you, just to give you an idea, most of our composers in Latin America, like Villalobos, Ginastera, Carlos Chávez, Silvestre Revueltas from Mexico, Villalobos from Brazil, Ginastera from Argentina, all of them got inspiration in folk music from their own countries. So I can tell you hundreds of composers that got inspiration. Even John Adams got inspiration in jazz or popular music, Steve Reich. So many American composers. Bernstein is a wonderful example of an incredible composer, conductor, incredible musician. Gershwin, even Mahler.
Yeah.
I mean, there are so many,
One of your inspirations, Bartók.
Bartók, of course. Bartók Ligeti at the beginning of his career.
Yeah.
Lutosławski as well at the beginning of his career.
And as you say, even Beethoven wrote 3 string quartets, which to some degree are based on Russian tunes.
Absolutely.
Russian folk songs.
Yes.
The Opus 59 quartets. Chopin wrote 53 mazurkas, which are based on Polish dance. So I think the idea that classical music and other music are separate is something we need to very strongly oppose all the time. That idea should not be part of our life, I think.
Bravo. Yes, I agree with you.
I think, and I'm so glad you asked this question because I think that's something we should keep talking about and making as much sense of that as possible.
Totally agree.
So, Rite of Spring was a big influence.
The Rite of the Spring was one of the most revolutionary ballets in 20th century. introduction is just amazing. I mean, that beginning with the bassoon playing in a very high register that actually Saint-Saëns got really angry and said that Stravinsky didn't know how to write for the bassoon.
It's become sort of a problem because the bassoon players today are so fabulous that they make it sound like a very natural and simple tune. I'm sure when he wrote it, the bassoon playing was not of this quality, and so it sounded all choked up and unnatural. And I think that's probably what he meant. So we need to find some really bad bassoon players.
Yes.
And after this sort of primordial thing, then we start getting this crazy rhythm.
The adolescence dance and the accents. I mean, that beginning of that, it's just amazing. Or the danza sacral, the last one. All these metric changes are incredible.
Yes, at the end, it's terrifying. And I find that you can't really follow it, but it sounds right. In other words, it always is unexpected.
Absolutely, yes.
So our game for today is bad reviews of famous composers.
Okay.
And there's a wonderful book called The Lexicon of Musical Invective, which was compiled by Nicholas Slonimsky, a very brilliant and funny and wonderful man. I will read a bad review, and you decide which composer this is about, and there'll be a choice. So this is from the London Observer in 1923. I suffered more than upon any occasion in my life, apart from an incident or two connected with painless dentistry. To begin with, there was his piano touch, but touch with its implication of light-fingered ease is a misnomer. He had a touch like a paving stone. Was this about John Williams, Sergei Rachmaninoff, or Bela Bartok?
Certainly John Williams not, because of the time.
Right.
So I guess Bartok?
Bartok is the answer. Sure, Bartok is the answer. Here's one from 1907 from the New York Post. This composer's music is the dreariest kind of rubbish. Does anybody for a moment doubt that he would write such chaotic, meaningless, cacophonous, ungrammatical stuff if he could invent a melody? Was this about Copland, Steve Reich, or Debussy?
Debussy.
Absolutely right, Debussy.
Unbelievable!
Unbelievable, yes.
Unbelievable!
And now, the final question.
Okay.
I won't even tell you, maybe I shouldn't give the date. This composer's second symphony is a crass monster, a hideously writhing wounded dragon that refuses to die, and though bleeding in the finale, furiously beats about with his tail erect. Was this Schubert, Hildegard von Bingen, or Beethoven?
Beethoven?
Beethoven is right. And this is about the second symphony. That's our quiz.
That was so fun.
Gabriela Ortiz, thank you so much for joining us today.
Emanuel, thank you so much. It was one of the funniest and entertainment interviews that I ever had.
I'm Manny Ax, and this is Classical Music Happy Hour. Classical Music Happy Hour is supported in part by the Robert and Mercedes Eichholz Foundation and by Linda Nelson. Our production team includes Lauren Purcell-Joyner, Eileen Delahunty, Laura Boyman, Elizabeth Nonamaker, David Norville, Christine Herskovitz, and Ed Yim. Our engineering team includes George Wellington, Irene Trudell, and Chase Kulpon. Classical Music Happy Hour is produced by WQXR in partnership with Carnegie Hall.